Hey, what's up guys? Welcome back to another episode of What's That Whiskey here on Drums and Drams. My name's Cameron, and today I've got one single blind sample to nose, taste, and review for all of you. This is gonna be a fully unbiased review. I have absolutely no idea what is in my glass. The whiskey came from this sample bottle, which is sample B, sent in by PinkDan, a very generous friend and supporter of the channel. So if you guys aren't familiar with What's That Whiskey, again, I'm gonna go through and do a blind review of this, but somewhere along the way, maybe the first nosing or maybe the first sip, I'm gonna show you guys what is in this glass before I find out. I'll put it somewhere along the bottom of the screen. So as the review goes along, I'm gonna be thinking about and making guesses, age, proof, distillery, type of whiskey, if it's finished or not, and maybe even a bottle guess. I'll lock those answers in at the end of the video. You know, final answer, who wants to be a millionaire style. Then I'll do the reveal for myself out of this reveal card that Dan sent along with this sample. We'll kind of do a quick debrief, see what I got right, see what I got wrong, and then we will get you on your way. So without further ado, let's get into this sample. Again, sent in by PinkDan. Pretty dark color on this one. I can actually already smell it out of the glass right now. I'm getting a very chocolatey kind of waft jumping out of the glass, and it smells a little bit crafty. So let's go to the nose now and see what we get here. Yeah, so crafty is pretty much spot on for this whiskey. My first impression is either some sort of Texas whiskey, some sort of hot climate, high heat, high floor in a warehouse, possibly a small barrel, possibly using kind of a wild yeast or heirloom grains. Like there are all sorts of ways, pot still, there are all sorts of ways that you can get this profile in a whiskey. It could be any combination of those things. And so I'm gonna do my best to kind of, guess around it. But first impression, again, craft whiskey. It's probably a bourbon or rye. I don't think this is like a malt whiskey or anything like that. Could be Texas, could be, I mean, heck, it could be Kentucky for all I know, but it's not the most pleasant nose for me. It's not really my profile. Very chocolatey, a lot of cinnamon stick notes, maybe even a little bit of cedar on here as well. So let's go back to the nose and keep digging in. Now, I will say one thing I am getting on this whiskey, besides actually a pretty decent proof punch on the nose, so I'm kind of in that like 125-ish range right now. The other thing I get is actually a little bit of citrus. So sometimes on these craft whiskeys, you can kind of deduce, let's say, blind, which of them are ryes and or high rye bourbons because of the way the citrus notes jump out of the texture. Oftentimes in a craft whiskey, when you deal with possibly small barrels, possibly heirloom grains, or any combination of those things that I've already talked about, if you have a rye whiskey, it doesn't always show through, like not in the traditional sense of rye whiskey, because you have so many of these very chocolatey, heavy, oak-laden notes that cover up a lot of those herbal qualities of rye. But I think the one thing that stands out for me usually in a craft whiskey like this, if it's high rye bourbon or a rye, is the citrus note. And so in this case, I'm actually picking up on kind of a lemon, a sweet lemon that's sticking out of the texture. And it does make me wonder if this is possibly a craft rye or maybe a craft high rye bourbon. So let's go to the palate now and see what we get here. Cheers. Yeah, this is just not my profile through and through. And I'm gonna feel bad. Oh man, very bitter back end. Oh, what is going on there? Very farmy, earthy soil. The back end is just downright unpleasant for me. It's extremely bitter. It's like coffee, but there's also something very stale and kind of musty about it. And actually, you know what I'm picking up? I said kind of farmy, kind of soil and dirt notes. There's something vegetal as well, almost like you pulled something out of the ground and you're just gnawing on the roots. Like that's the impression I'm getting on the finish of this whiskey. You know what? It actually has a little bit of like a cannabis finish, which I've picked up on the malt whiskeys, the American malt whiskeys that River Roots sourced. They were very, very high proof. But basically I'm trying to square the finish of this whiskey with everything else that I'm getting and wrap it up in some neat package. I mean, at the end of the day, I'm not gonna get this bottle right. I'm probably not gonna get the distillery and maybe even the state right. I'll try to get close on age and proof. And hopefully like this, this long essay I'm giving you right now will get somewhere close and approximate this whiskey. Let's go back in now for a second sip. All right, so I'm just gonna go ahead and start guessing some stats as I kind of make my way through this very bitter and herbal and just kind of nasty finish on this whiskey. I'm sorry, Dan, if you like this whiskey. I just don't like it. It's not my thing. So let's start with age here. It's gonna be deceptive because this could be 4 years old, this could be 10 years old. It could be all over the place, I think, as far as age goes. It actually feels pretty well developed. My instincts say to call this a 6-year product, but I could also see this being like 13 years old. That's a big range, but I think this is masquerading as an older whiskey and not actually an older whiskey. So let's go 6 years. Proof, I'm gonna just throw a number out. I'm gonna go 128 on the proof of this whiskey. It could even be hotter. Here's where we get down to business. I am going to say that this is a bourbon. I think it could be a high rye bourbon, but I also think that citrus note could be coming from that weird finish, whatever's causing that. So let's just call this a bourbon. And I have no idea the state of distillation. I don't think it's finished. I don't really have a distillery guess on this. I've got really nothing on this one. So let's see what this is, guys. I'm very nervous about what this could be. All right, here we go, guys. Let's see what we have here. Okay. I mean, this totally tracks, actually. This totally tracks. I'm so bummed that I didn't get the finish on this, but I don't think I ever would have. So this is 291, and I've been to 291 in Colorado, actually. My wife and I got married out there, and so we visited when we were out there for the week that we got married. So this is a single barrel proof, I believe probably a bourbon. It's 128.5 proof. So I mean, I was about as close as you can get on the proof here. I don't know the age of this pick. If I do find out from Dan, or if I can figure out what the typical age would be, I'll put that on the screen as well. So proof, pretty good. Nailed the fact that it's bourbon, nailed the fact that it's craft. I wouldn't have guessed Colorado. 291 hasn't popped into my mind for several years at this point, but it does make sense. Finished with aspen wood staves is the thing that's gonna throw you off on this. It's not a common finish. I don't even know if I've ever heard of anybody else doing that. So I wouldn't have guessed finished. And it's hard to tell on these craft products that have this extremely syrupy, dark profile. It's hard to tell if they are finished because everything just kind of runs together. Speaking of finish, the finish of this whiskey is absolutely atrocious in my opinion. And that's just probably a stylistic thing for me. I don't hate all craft whiskey. I drink a lot less of it now than I used to. Like, I used to get down with Hidden Barn, and actually I kind of like 291 once upon a time. I have since really fallen away from that style of whiskey. It just doesn't do it for me anymore. And I think part of that too is being a little less adventurous with Scotch and other world whiskeys as well. Like, I'm much more down an American rabbit hole now, which I think kind of narrows the profiles that I tend to look for. So maybe I need to expand that a little bit. This does appear to be a Fred Minnick pick. I wouldn't hold this against Fred, necessarily. You have no idea what people are picking from when they do pick single barrels. And I know Fred likes 291, and he does like to, have a little bit of variety in the things that he picks. But this one for me, it just didn't do it. So thanks, Dan, for the sample. Guys, let me know if you've tried this particular pick or any other 291 products. How do you think I did in this video? Cheers, and I'll see you guys soon here on Drums and Drams.